God is perfectly faithful.
Professor Van Inhofe.
Thank you. In a
Professor
way,
Morriston?
this is
Professor Morriston?
no, this is addressed to you, Mark.
Right.
So in a way, I'm just re-asking Professor Levine's question, because he pretty much asked the question I was going to ask. My aliens, I wanted to add, clearly had no biological commonality with human beings, no DNA, no cellular structure, just those reservoirs of purple goo that the philosophers of mind have imagined. And furthermore, we can't, if a lion could talk, we couldn't understand them. I believe in this movie, the communication, we can't even communicate with them.
Yeah.
So it looks pretty much as if Thompson, and any non-theist who takes this view, is going to say, sure, sow their continents with radioactive dust. Do whatever you want to get their planet, because there's just no commonality, no dechiological.
Well, so even on the strongest version of that view, it wouldn't be true that one can act wantonly with respect to them and do so without acting wrongly.
It wouldn't be unjust.
Or it wouldn't be you're right. It wouldn't be unjust, right?
There might be a reason not to do it, but it wouldn't be that it would be unjust.
Yeah, it might be cruel and awful and heartless and so forth, but not unjust.
We could not wrong them.
We couldn't wrong them. I take it that the reason why they can't communicate is not because they're not the kinds of beings that are language users, but that we just don't have the common equipment to do it, right? Yeah. So right on a view like Thompson's, he's stuck with the view that these people can't be wronged, and so he says, again, he does recognize this as a bite, as a bullet to be bitten. That we'll have to appeal to various other sorts of normative assessment to make clear why it's not a good idea to deal with such beings, or for them to deal with us, right, in ways that are disregarding of the value. I said I don't think I'm as yet committed to that view. I mean, so this and good, Paul, this will help because this is a way of sort of meagerly addressing the question that you want. So Paul say, why is it the case that all of beings with a human nature, right, we're all tied to each other? I don't know. I mean, this is a sort of a datum that I'm starting with. I mean, you people have far many more moral intuitions than I have. So this is mine's pretty minimal. Okay, sharing a common human nature is sufficient. Now, if you say, well, now work that up into a sort of a stronger theory, right? What exactly do you mean by nature, right? That's sufficient. Is it the case that these gooey beings from another planet share our common human nature? Well, yeah, it's possible that on one clear sense they don't. They have a different evolutionary origin and so forth. But if it's the case that they're created in some way in God's image or something like that, right? It may be true that they share the rational beings, that they share a common nature with us, even though the biological origins are entirely distinct. So the source constraint could be met. Again, Thompson can't say that, but the theist can say that.
Mark, I've got a question for you. Seems like all the questions are for you. And as you know, since you are the planning a fellow, I have a vested interest in your not making mistakes.
I also have one in your not making mistakes.
Yeah, you probably have a stronger vested interest there than I do. But I really want to return to Paul Weithman's question. The suggestion that it might, I mean, here's my thought, something that you seem to object to on page 11. Here you say, I take it that what we may call God's justice, this is at the top of the left column there,
right,
is not something that is essentially constraining, that it is neither true that God experiences the norms of justice as constraints on God's willing. That certainly seems right, just as he wouldn't experience, say, the laws of logic as constraints on his action or on his thought, nor that God's will is simply necessarily such that it never goes contrary to these constraints.
Yeah.
Now, that's the part I don't understand. Why can't that be just part of God's will? Why couldn't it be like this, that God is just part of God's nature? In every possible world, God disapproves of certain states of affairs, including certain states of affairs that involve him, just as in every possible world he he believes with affirmation the denial of certain propositions, including propositions about him. Among those states of affairs might be treating his creatures in a certain way, treating creatures, rational creatures, treating these beings he's created in a certain way, killing them just for the fun of it. God can't do such a thing. It's part of his nature not to do it, but it's also part of his nature to disapprove of those states of affairs, and that would be sufficient, it seems to me, for there to be norms of justice that apply both to him and to them.
Yeah, well,
I don't know why that wouldn't be.
so I'm not sure I understand the view. So I said there's something that I say, well, let's just call it God's justice, right? And are you saying that what God's justice refers to is God's necessarily willing certain sorts of human action with respect to each other and certain sorts of human refrainings with respect to each other?
No,
okay, so God's justice isn't the willings, right? But something distinct from them that ensures the willings?
The willings or the approvals, that part doesn't matter. It's rather that what he wills or what he approves or disapproves of involve not only human beings, but also himself in his relationship with human beings. That's the thought.
Okay, so right, but okay. So there's certain sets of, there's a certain, call them abstractly, right, patterns of interaction between among human beings, right, and between humans and God, right, and then God wills, intends or something like that, those sorts of interactions between them, right? I mean, I guess one way of thinking about it, I mean, I don't know if this is, is just a mistake or not, but I mean, one thing that you could ask is sort of, well, in what sense do we have any reason to think this is an excellence of God, right? So to call it a justice, to call it God's justice, right? I take it that sort of part of this, at least, just a second. So part of the motivation. Yeah, this is going to be bad. Okay, I can see this coming, right? So part of the motivation for sort of saying, well, there's got to be something like God's justice and God sort of that explain is it something that accounts for God. This is something that Wes was pushing on. That explains why God is worthy of worship, right? That God exhibits justice in some way. But I don't see in any way how just the fact that God necessarily wills certain patterns of interaction, right, makes it the case that this is a divine excellence or anything like that, right? So with respect to other sorts of divine perfections, right, those of knowledge or power, or so forth, right, we can characterize sort of what the perfection is supposed to be and how God measures up to it. But if we talk about God's justice in the way that you characterized it, it's not obvious to me that this is anything like a divine perfection. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if my view has that implication either. I mean, but only if it allows for it, it's only because I've said so little, right, about what God's justice consists in, right? So, sorry, I know that's beyond weak.
I was waiting for you to get to like my favorite theory that it has to do with norms that are grounded in rational agency.
Mm-hmm.
But you dismiss the view pretty quickly, I think, that our shared rational nature with God is sufficient to establish those norms. Yeah. And all you said, as far as I can see, is that there are things that we want to call rational agents to whom we clearly are not. Now, I take a very dim view of this business that corporations are rational agents, but I could put it more concisely and say, if they're rational agents, they're not rational agents in the morally relevant sense. And I'm convinced that if we had some time and ideally some alcohol that I could make you see that yes. I mean, I think there's a lot.
I'll take you up on that.
I think there's a lot to be said about what it is about the kind of rational agency that we embody that makes us very different from the kind of rational agents that corporations are, if they are. I mean, they're not agents that. Well, never mind. I won't go into it.
So it would not only have to be the case that since you're holding on the microphone, I can say that because you'll have a chance to finish up. I mean, so it would not only have to be the case that you've shown that what it is about the kind of rational agents that we are that make us that sort of ground these sorts of this sort of decheological order, but it would have to be something about us that both we and God share, right? Because it would have. I mean, because otherwise you still won't get the.
Yeah, I think it's the psychology, basically.
Okay.
I think it has to do with the psychology, and I think Data in Star Trek and the aliens in District 9 satisfy those conditions. But what I want to know is there any other argument against that view?
Is there any other argument against the view that rational nature
Is sufficient to ground these?
is sufficient nature to do it? That's a great question. That's all I've got for you now. Give me a few more beers and I'll see if I can think about it. Not more, I mean a few. And that's not where I was during John's talk. So.